The morning had been perfectly ordinary. I was in my design studio, sketching trim options for a client's coastal home, sunlight spilling through the tall front windows, when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail. But instinct made me answer. Mrs. Grant. The voice was clipped, efficient. This is Melissa from Horizon Credit Recovery. We're trying to reach Taryn Blake in regard to an outstanding balance of $47,000. Your number is listed here as a financial reference. My pen froze mid-line. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? She did, without a trace of hesitation. The words landed: heavy gambling debt, overdue, reference. My mind reached for some logical explanation, but nothing fit. I'm afraid I can't help you, I said finally, my tone calm, but my fingers gripping the phone so tightly they ached. Please remove my number from your file. The line clicked off, leaving me with the low hum of the air conditioner filling the quiet. I stared at the half-finished sketch on my desk, the pencil line now jagged where my hand had trembled. I'd known Taryn for 2 years. She was sharp-tongued, in a way that could be mistaken for confidence. Always dressed like a woman with somewhere more important to be, Cole adored her. And I had accepted her. Or maybe I'd trained myself not to look too closely. But this was not something you could misinterpret. I rose from my chair and walked into the kitchen at the back of the studio. The tile felt cold under my bare feet. I poured a glass of water, took one sip, then set it down untouched. The number 47,000 looped in my head like a bad jingle. Somewhere in a drawer at home were the wedding contracts. Every invoice I'd signed in my name, $96,000 worth of celebration, all for the sake of my only son's happiness. And now, a debt collector's voice sat in the middle of that picture, refusing to be ignored. I picked up my keys from the counter, locked the studio behind me, and stepped out into the Savannah heat. The sunlight that had seemed so pleasant an hour ago now felt harsh, pressing down on my shoulders as I crossed the parking lot. By the time I slid into my car, I knew I wouldn't be going back to work that afternoon. There were things in my house I needed to find, and maybe things I didn't want to see. The drive home was a blur, the streets of Savannah sliding past without me really seeing them. My mind kept returning to moments I'd filed away as quirks or harmless habits. Taryn tilting her phone away during dinner at the Gray. The way she'd gone rigid when I'd mentioned locking in final payments for the catering. That afternoon she'd stopped by with coffee. All charm. Before asking me to co-sign a small personal loan just to build my credit before the wedding. I'd laughed it off then, telling her there was no need if Cole already had stable finances. She'd smiled tightly, then changed the subject. Inside my house. I dropped my purse on the sideboard and went straight to the dining room cabinet. The wedding binder was on the bottom shelf, wedged between my grandmother's china and an old family photo album. I set it on the table and opened it. The tabbed sections neat and labeled venue, catering, florals, transportation. Tucked into the back pocket were papers Taryn had handed me weeks ago. Receipts and confirmations I hadn't bothered to look at closely. Among them was a slim stack of bank statements. The top one bore Cole's name and Taryn's, a joint account I hadn't even known existed. My eyes moved down the list of charges. Bet Now, Spin King, Golden Reel Casino. Not one, not two, but dozens of transactions over the past 3 months. Several were for amounts large enough to make my stomach tighten. Halfway down the second statement, I saw transfers from Cole's primary account into the joint one, then, almost immediately, withdrawals to the same casino vendors. It wasn't just Taryn's money disappearing. Cole's earnings were being funneled straight into the same drain. I sat back, the pages limp in my hands. It wasn't a rumor now, not hearsay from a stranger on the phone. This was in black and white. Each line another piece of the truth I didn't want to see. I stacked the statements neatly, slid them into the binder, and closed the cover with deliberate care. My next move would have to be thought through, not rushed. By the time the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 5, I knew I needed to hear Cole's voice before the day was over. Cole came by the next morning, dropping in on his way to work like he sometimes did when he wanted a strong cup of coffee and a quick chat. I set his mug on the counter and tried to sound casual. "You know," I began, stirring cream into my own cup. "Money troubles can take a toll on a marriage faster than people expect. I've seen couples with every advantage crumble under the weight of debt." He smiled faintly, glancing at his watch. "We're fine, Mom. Taryn and I have everything under control. It's not about control. It's about knowing exactly where things stand before Mom." He cut in gently. "I appreciate you worrying, but you don't have to. We're good." He kissed my cheek, grabbed his travel mug, and was out the door before I could press further. The conversation had landed like a pebble on a pond, barely a ripple, before the surface smoothed over again. That evening, as I was loading the dishwasher, my phone buzzed. I wiped my hands and glanced at the screen. It was a text from Cole. "I'd rather lose my mother than lose my wife." The words pulled the air out of the room. I stood there, the phone heavy in my hand, reading them twice, then a third time. The sting was sharp but familiar, like a wound reopening. I set the phone down and walked to my study. The one place in the house that still felt like mine, alone. I pulled open the bottom drawer where I kept the wedding contracts venue, catering, photography, florals, each one signed in my name. I checked the totals. $96,000 in commitments. Beside the folder was the purchase agreement for the pearl white SUV I'd bought as their wedding gift. Still registered to me. I sat at the desk, the lamp casting a narrow cone of light over the papers, and began flipping through them slowly, noting every clause, every penalty for cancellation. My hurt was already shifting into something else cool. Deliberate focus. If Cole was so certain of his choice, then I needed to be just as certain of mine. By the next morning, I had an appointment with Elias Morton. He'd been my attorney for over a decade, steady as a metronome and just as precise. When I laid the contracts across his desk, he adjusted his glasses and began reading without a word. It took him less than 20 minutes to finish. "Maricel," he said finally, leaning back. "Every single contract is in your name as the sole signatory. The deposits and balances have all been paid from your accounts. That means you have full authority to modify or cancel them. And the SUV I asked, registered to you until transfer of title. You could sell it, return it, or keep it without any legal issue." I nodded slowly, the confirmation settling into my bones. "Penalties." He flipped through his notes. "They vary most between 10 to 15% of the total service fee. Some flat rate fees. You'd lose money. Yes, but you'd be saving the bulk of it." It wasn't about the money anymore, but the numbers helped solidify the scale of what I was protecting. $96,000 in wedding contracts. A gift car worth nearly 50. All of it funded out of love and trust, and now, sitting like bait for someone else's benefit. When I left Elias's office, the Savannah air was thick, the kind that clings to your skin. I drove home without the radio on, my thoughts as loud as any song. In the dining room, I cleared the table and spread the contracts out in rows. I made 3 stacks: venue and catering, decor and entertainment, transport and photography. I read every clause, marking penalties in red ink, dates in blue, for each one. I wrote the cancellation contact, email, and deadline in a separate notebook. The SUV file sat apart from the rest. I called the dealership to confirm the process for halting custom work and reclaiming it. The salesman sounded surprised, but not enough to ask why. By the time the grandfather clock chimed 8, the table looked like a battlefield map, colored marks, notes, dates, phone numbers. My hands smelled faintly of ink, and the pen I'd started with had run dry. I stacked the files into a single pile, bound them with a wide rubber band, and set them beside my phone if I chose to make the calls. Everything could be undone in 48 hours. I started with the largest contracts first. The venue coordinator's voice was bright when she answered, but it dimmed quickly when I told her I needed to cancel. She reminded me of the non-refundable deposit, the penalty fee, the exclusivity of the date. I told her I understood, gave her my email for the formal notice, and hung up before she could try to talk me into rescheduling. The catering manager was next. He sighed heavily, as if my decision was a personal affront, then rattled off the cost of ingredients already ordered. I wrote it down, thanked him, and filed the number under penalties paid. Florals came after lunch, a softer voice, almost pleading for me to reconsider. I pictured boxes of imported blooms wilting in a warehouse, but I kept my tone even. Please send the invoice. I'll settle it today. Music and photography were easier. Both were used to last-minute changes, though neither hid their disappointment. Each email confirmation went into a growing folder on my desktop labeled cancellations. March. By the second afternoon, the list was complete. I'd paid the penalties just under $8,000 and closed the chapter on every major wedding expense. The SUV was more delicate. I drove to the dealership in person, the contract folder in my bag. The salesman recognized me immediately, ready to walk me through the final customization. I told him there would be no final customization. His smile faltered, but he processed the reversal without argument. The keys were back in my purse before I left the lot. Last came the accounts. I met with the bank manager in her small office, explaining that I needed to close the joint wedding accounts immediately. She verified that all funds had come from me, then initiated the closure. The balance, $15,324, was transferred into my personal savings. Each receipt, statement, and email went into a physical binder, organized by date and category. If the backlash came, and I knew it would, I wanted every fact in my corner. When the last paper was filed, I sat at the dining table, looking at the neatly stacked evidence of what I'd done. It had taken less than 48 hours to dismantle what I'd been building for over a year. The house was silent, except for the sound of my phone buzzing in the other room. It was late Saturday morning when the pounding on my front door started. I'd barely made it to the hallway before I heard Taryn's voice, sharp, high, and already at full volume. I opened the door to find her on the top step. Cole behind her, his jaw set tight. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded, not even waiting for a greeting. "The venue, the catering, everything gone. Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" Cole's eyes were locked on mine, hurt and disbelief mixed in equal measure. "You sabotaged our wedding, Mom." I stepped aside, staying in the doorway but leaving room between us. "I canceled contracts that I paid for, because I will not fund a marriage built on lies," Taryn scoffed. "Lies? Is that your excuse?" You couldn't stand that Cole chose me over you before I could answer. The sound of footsteps on the sidewalk drew all our attention. Mrs. Aldridge, my neighbor from 2 doors down, was passing by with her dachshund in tow. She slowed, taking in the scene. "Oh, hi. Cole?" she said cheerfully. "I saw Taryn with that man from the marina last week. What's his name? Looked like. You two were having a great time." The air seemed to stop moving. Cole blinked at her, confusion tightening his brow. What man? Taryn's laugh was quick, brittle. Oh, please, you must be mistaken. Mrs. Aldridge tilted her head. No, I'm sure it was you. By the docks on Tuesday afternoon. She gave a little wave and kept walking. Cole's gaze swung back to Taryn. Tuesday. You told me you were at a fittings appointment. I was, she said. Too fast. He's just a friend. We ran into each other. Her eyes flicked toward me, hard and cold, as if daring me to speak. I just stood there, letting the weight of the moment press down. Cole's shoulders dropped a fraction, the first crack in the wall he'd been holding up. Taryn turned abruptly, stomping down the steps. I'm not doing this. She threw over her shoulder and kept walking toward the street. Cole lingered, his expression unsettled. Before following her to the car without another word, the week that followed felt strangely muted. Cole called less, texted even less than that. When we did speak, his voice was flat, careful, as if he was measuring every word. I knew Taryn was still around. Her social media showed them at dinner, smiling for the camera, but there was something in his eyes in those pictures that hadn't been there before. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail until the voice on the other end introduced herself. My name is Rowena Blake. She said, I'm Taryn's cousin. The pause that followed was deliberate, as though she wanted me to brace for what came next. I think you should know, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. She told me about a man named Derek Lawson, Taryn's former fiancé in Jacksonville. They'd been engaged for less than a year, according to Rowena. Derek had put Taryn's name on his accounts, bought her a new car, and helped her start a boutique that never actually opened. 3 months before the wedding, Rowena continued, Derek found out she'd drained nearly all of his savings. She said it was to pay off debts from a business partner, but no one ever saw proof. The engagement ended overnight. She moved out and blocked his number. I sat there, pen in hand, scribbling the names and details without even realizing it. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I saw her at a family barbecue last summer, Rowena said quietly. And she was bragging about how she was set for life with a new guy whose family had money. I think that's your son. Her voice faltered. Look, Taryn and I don't speak anymore. She'll cut me off completely if she knows I called. But I've watched her do this twice now. I couldn't stay quiet if there's still time for him to get out. We spoke for another few minutes. Long enough for me to confirm Rowena's story and write down Derek's contact information. When we hung up, I stared at the notepad in front of me, the ink still drying on a truth I already suspected. That night, I decided it was time for Cole to hear it all. I called Cole on Saturday morning and told him I wanted him over for dinner. Just the two of us. He hesitated before agreeing, his voice quieter than usual. When he arrived, I'd set the table simply roast chicken, green beans, cornbread, no distractions, no guests. We ate in near silence, the clink of cutlery the only sound between us. When the plates were cleared, I brought the folder from my study and set it down in front of him. This is everything I've found, I said. Not rumors, documents, dates, names, and a phone number for someone you might want to talk to. I began with the gambling debts, sliding over the statements with the casino charges. I explained the transfers from his own accounts, the withdrawals matching Taryn's spending. He stared at the pages, jaw tightening, but didn't interrupt. Then I told him about Rowena's call, about Derek Lawson, the drained savings, and the boutique that never opened. I gave him Derek's contact information and left it there, the silence stretching as he kept his eyes on the papers. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. I've noticed things, he admitted slowly. Stories that didn't line up. Times she said she was somewhere, but he trailed off, shaking his head. I wanted to believe her. I didn't press. He gathered the papers into a neat stack, his hands steady, but his eyes distant. "Thank you for telling me," he said, and left not long after, tucking the folder under his arm. I didn't sleep much that night. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a single message from him. "It's over." I ended it. I set the phone down. The words ringing in my mind. The relief was tangled with sadness, but it was done. The next morning, the calls began. The first call was from my sister-in-law, her voice sharp before I could say hello. She'd heard from a friend that I'd canceled the wedding behind Cole's back. I explained as simply as I could, but she wasn't listening. By the end of the call, she said she hoped I was happy breaking up a family. Others followed cousins, old friends, some curious, some openly critical. At the grocery store, 2 women I'd known for years lowered their voices as I passed, their eyes following me down the aisle. I kept my head up, but each glance left its mark. Cole told me work had been uncomfortable. People had asked why the wedding was off, and he'd kept his answers short. "It's nobody's business," he said, but I could hear the strain in his voice. At night, I sat in my living room, the house unusually still, and thought about the weight of what I'd done. I had dismantled a year's worth of planning, taken back gifts, shut down accounts. I had made myself the center of gossip, but I'd also stopped Cole from tying himself to someone who saw him as a resource instead of a partner. I'd seen where that road led, and I couldn't let him walk it. It was a cost I could bear, even if it meant carrying the blame for a while. 1 week later, there was a knock at my door that told me the storm wasn't over yet. By summer, the sharp edges of the whole ordeal had worn down. Cole had paid off the last of the debts tied to the joint accounts and closed them for good. He'd taken on extra shifts, picked up freelance work, and for the first time in months, I could hear real ease in his voice when we spoke. He wasn't rushing into anything new. The woman he'd started seeing worked in the same building, someone he'd known casually for years. They met for coffee, walked after work, kept it simple. He told me there was no timeline, no pressure, just conversation and fresh air. I'd settled back into my own rhythms. My garden had taken on a life of its own that season, the roses climbing higher than I'd ever seen them. I spent mornings pulling weeds and afternoons tending the soil, the quiet work steadying me. Now and then, I'd catch myself remembering the accusations, the stares, the phone calls from people convinced they knew better. Those memories didn't sting the way they once had. I knew what they didn't, that every decision I'd made came from the same place I'd been coming from since the day Cole was born. I wasn't trying to control him. I was trying to keep him whole. Sometimes protecting the people you love means becoming the villain in their story until they rewrite the ending themselves.